Hi, this is Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who've died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. In keeping with our tradition of following who's the oldest surviving person in the world, we have to note that Misao Okawa, the oldest living person in the world, died recently at the age of 117. She lived in Osaka, Japan. She was born in 1898 and survived the entire 20th century. When she was a young sprite of 114, ITN News did a feature on her.
Misao Okawa from Osaka in West Japan has officially been recognized as the oldest woman alive at a staggering 114 years old. Born to a clothing merchant in 1898, Okawa is due to celebrate her 115th birthday in just a few days' time. The supercentenarian was presented with a certificate for her achievement by Guinness World Records on Wednesday and asked how it felt to be the oldest woman. She was brief, but to the point. Given everything, it's pretty good, she said, with a family member clarifying her comment. Okawa has never had a major illness in her life and only travels in a wheelchair to prevent her from falling over. It's also handy for a little nap. She married in 1990, her oldest son is 90, and she currently has 3 children, 4 grandchildren, and 6 great-grandchildren.
Well, with Miss Okawa's passing, the oldest person in the world becomes Gertrude Weaver of Arkansas, who was born on July 4th, 1898, and is currently 116. Good luck, Gertrude. We're going to move on now to Rod Hundley, who died recently at the age of 80. Rod was a great basketball player and a really funny guy. He came out of West Virginia in the 50s from a broken home. He was sort of a juvenile, delinquent pool hall bum, but he also happened to be the best player to come out of West Virginia in the early 50s, and he was an All-American at West Virginia and the first draft choice for the NBA. He went on to play for the Lakers. I say he was the best player to come out of West Virginia in the early 50s and qualified it because in the late 50s, there was a kid from down the way a little piece from Cabin Creek. His nickname was Zeke, and Rod Hundley got him to come to West Virginia too. He was the best player to come out of West Virginia in the 50s. That was Jerry West. And they were sort of the yin and the yang of basketball. Jerry West was the milk-drinking, sort of straight-laced guy who concentrated on his basketball game. Hot Rod Hundley was the wild living guy who didn't concentrate that much on basketball, but had a good time. Jerry West would practice shooting that great jump shot. Hot Rod might shoot from one knee. Jerry West became the greater player, one of the legends who the NBA logo was modeled after. Hot Rod wasn't that great an NBA player, but he got into the NBA Hall of Fame as an announcer. The only ex-player to go in as an announcer. He became an announcer for the NBA and for 35 years for the Utah Jazz. Here's West Virginia television on the legend Hot Rod Hundley.
One of the greatest players ever to wear a West Virginia University basketball uniform, Hot Rod Hundley, has passed away. Born Rodney Clark Hundley, the Charleston native is one of just 2 men, Jerry West the other, to have their jersey number retired at WVU. Hundley led the Mountaineers to 3 NCAA tournament appearances from 1955 to 1957. As a senior, he earned first-team consensus All-American status. Hundley was the number 1 overall pick in the 1957 NBA draft. He would play 6 seasons for the Minneapolis and Los Angeles Lakers, making All-Star appearances twice. Hundley remained in the game of basketball following his retirement as a radio voice for the Suns, Lakers, and a long run calling games for the Utah Jazz. In 2010, Hot Rod joined Mr. Clutch as his number was raised to the rafters in Morgantown.
It's just one of the greatest things that's ever happened to me in sports, and I'm so proud to be around here and to get this far.
Ever the showman on the court, Hundley took one more shot in front of a sold-out Coliseum.
Actually, that last shot was a no-look hook shot that went right in. Although they once asked Hot Rod what his favorite shot was, he said Cuddy in water. When he moved out to Los Angeles, he moved into a really nice house in Southern California. He bought his kids a pool table. He said, I wanted them to have the same advantages I had when I was a kid. As a kid, he played in every dingy pool hall in West Virginia. Here's a little bit of him announcing for the Jazz. He was a great announcer.
Stockton with the ball, front court left. He looks to Carmelo. He's got him low. The mailman jumps it. Shot up. It's it. He did it. He did it. John Stockton to Carmelo.
And of course, Hot Rod's famous signature line.
And you gotta love it, baby.
You gotta love a hot rod, baby. Number 33 in your programs, number 1 in your hearts. We're going to move on now to our feature tonight, Lieutenant Colonel Robert Hite, who died recently at the age of 95. He was one of the last remaining Doolittle's raiders. He was a co-pilot in one of the 16 planes and one of the 80 airmen who flew the first bombing raid against Tokyo in April 1942, 4 months after Pearl Harbor. The raid was organized by Colonel Jimmy Doolittle, and while the bombing didn't do much to Japan, it bolstered American morale when it was at a low point. Unfortunately for Lieutenant Colonel Hite and some of the other pilots, they had to take off from about 800 miles from Japan in the North Pacific, and they didn't have enough return fuel to get back to their ships, so they had to ditch their planes in China. Those airmen who ditched their ships in China that was under Chiang Kai-shek's rule were lucky enough to be rescued and returned home as heroes to the United States. Unfortunately, others, like Lieutenant Colonel Hite, ditched in Japan-controlled China. They were captured, sent to Japan, and spent the remainder of the war there. They would have been killed had the United States invaded Japan, but they were released after the atomic bomb was dropped. The raid was top secret when it occurred, but a little while after that, Franklin Roosevelt mentioned that ships had bombed Japan and they'd taken off from a mysterious place called Shangri-La, actually the aircraft carrier Hornet. Here's a World War II film release on how Doolittle's raiders managed to get in position to bomb Japan.
History in the making at the mysterious Shangri-La. Actually, the United States Navy aircraft carrier Hornet steams westward across the Pacific. The protecting force of cruisers and destroyers, with the hard-hitting Admiral Halsey in command, slams into a gale, determined to reach a position 400 miles from Tokyo unless intercepted by the enemy. Packed on the afterdeck of the Hornet are 16 B-25 Mitchell bombers. Never before have these huge planes been launched from a carrier. High explosive and demolition bombs are made ready for the destruction of military objectives in Japan. Colonel, now Major General Doolittle, with Captain Mark Mitcher, commander of the aircraft carrier Hornet, who was once decorated by Japan, now gives his medal to be returned to the Japs on the tail of a bomb. Not until they are miles at sea do these men know definitely the mission for which they have volunteered. Now their thoughts go back to their months of careful preparation, clothed in the greatest secrecy. Only Colonel Doolittle knew that Japan was to be their target. Now they realize that the miniature cities laid out for practice bombing near an American airfield duplicated military objectives: Tokyo, Yokohama, Nagoya, Kobe, and Osaka. The greatest surprise raid in the history of aerial warfare. Not even certain they can take off successfully from a carrier that was never designed for launching Army bombing planes. Closer and closer they approach enemy-controlled waters and the danger of discovery. Jimmy Doolittle and Captain Mitcher discuss every detail of the carrier takeoff. Suddenly, a strange vessel is sighted. It's a Jap patrol boat, and the task force intends to destroy it before a warning can be radioed to Japan. The lifeboat goes to pick up Jap survivors. It is feared they have flashed the news to heavy Jap naval forces in the vicinity. Survivors are picked up and brought aboard. Jimmy Doolittle asks Admiral Halsey to go in closer for another hour and a half. Now the signal is flashed for the takeoff, 10 hours ahead of schedule. The added distance to be flown increases the hazard. Doolittle pilots the lead plane. There's a breathless moment as the big bomber gathers speed. It's airborne. The first Army bomber ever to be launched from a carrier is safely in the air. Now they know it can be done, and they time their takeoff with the upsurge of the bow of the carrier in the heavy sea. Nose wheel lifted and wing flaps down for maximum lift and the quickest possible takeoff. Another B-25 to join the formation circling over the task force until all the 16 planes can get into the air.
Here's a more recent documentary on the Doolittle Raid with a little commentary from Lieutenant Colonel Hite not long before he died.
In the immediate days and weeks after Pearl Harbor, of course, America felt violated. I mean, we were angry. We were obviously very saddened by the loss of life. As the news of how much damage the Japanese had managed to inflict, which was initially confidential and then gradually seeped out into the public consciousness, as that became known, the sense of anger and desire for revenge became quite strong. And even though the overall strategic plan of the Allies was to concentrate on Germany first, the fact that Japan had committed this unannounced Sunday morning raid that had so badly devastated the American Pacific Fleet led to a desire for revenge as soon as possible. When Jimmy Doolittle first set this up, he could not tell the pilots what the mission was. He told them that they had been invited here to volunteer, if they desired, for a special mission. He couldn't tell them what it was, except that it was dangerous.
We were the only group that had the proper type of airplane. We were flying B-25s.
Now, the training consisted of instruction from a Navy lieutenant about how to take off in less than 250 feet of runway, how to get into the air with only about 75 knots of airspeed. Now, this violated everything they'd been taught in flight school. Once they saw that they were lifting off from painted carrier decks on the runway, a few of them began to intuit exactly what was going on. The idea of putting an Army air group on board a carrier was brand new, and it caused some hackles to rise. Once those pilots got on board the Hornet, there was a bit of tension between the two. First of all, the Army pilots tended to keep to themselves, and some of the Navy people resented that a bit. A few of them thought that the Army folks were a little slapdash. They didn't wear neckties on board. They wore open-collar shirts, short sleeve instead of the regulation Navy long sleeves. They would call a meeting for 8:30, and the Army pilots would wander in around 9 o'clock. And some of these things created a bit of tension between the two services. But what made it evaporate almost immediately was when the Hornet finally got to sea, went out under the Golden Gate Bridge and into the Pacific, and Mitchell was able to get on the 1MC and announce that the goal of the mission was to bomb Tokyo. Once the Navy people knew that, then all of a sudden the Army pilots were their best friends. A lot of them assumed it was probably be a one-way flight. They never hesitated. The raid really begins in a way in the pre-dawn darkness of April 18th, about 3 o'clock in the morning, when American radar identified a surface contact. And in these waters, so close to Japan, only 500, 550 miles out, it could only be a hostile contact. So it was clear that there was an enemy somewhere in the vicinity.
We watched 15 airplanes take off, so we felt pretty sure we could make it.
Once those B-25s got into the air, the American forces just moved away from each other as fast as they possibly could. The 16 B-25 bombers that flew over Japan each carried 4 500-pound bombs. The physical damage was minimal. The Japanese blew up those occasions when bombs went astray and actually landed in non-combatant areas, schools, and hospitals. They, of course, got their propaganda machine going and said, oh, these ruthless Americans were killing women and children and so on. They punned on Jimmy Doolittle's name by saying that the raid had done little to affect the Japanese, and in effect that was true. But the psychic damage is hard to measure, and that was real and palpable.
And I think it really surprised them. They never suspected us in a B-25 taking off a carrier Hornet and bombing them, you know. We weren't sure we could bomb them back.
Here's some comments by a couple of his mates on the raid.
People were very happy about it, to hear that we were able to go over there, take off from carriers and bomb the home island of the Japanese. Nothing like that had ever been done before. And it shook the Japanese tremendously. They were very unhappy about the whole thing.
Morale of the whole nation just really went up. That was one of the big things we accomplished, because that made such an impression on the Americans that they just worked that much harder.
It was the beginning of the end for them, if they recognized it.
There are now only 2 surviving Doolittle Raiders, Lieutenant Colonel Richard Cole and Staff Sergeant David Thatcher. We're going to close tonight with Gary Dahl, who died recently at the age of 75. This guy was a testimony to H.L. Mencken's statement that nobody ever went broke, underestimating the taste of the American public. 1975, he's sitting in a bar in Los Gatos, California. He's a freelance copywriter, not making too much money. He's having a couple of drinks, and a couple of his buddies are complaining about how much they have to care for their pets. So he comes up with an idea for a pet that doesn't need any care. It's the pet rock. Buys a bunch of Mexican stones, comes up with a carrying case, and writes a little manual for the care of the pet rock. He's charging $4 for this, imagine that. Sure enough, by Christmas of 1975, he's got one of the biggest fads to hit the United States since the hula hoop, and it makes him an instant millionaire. Fad died out quickly. It was actually a pretty funny manual. I never bought one, but it had guys like me wondering how we couldn't think of something like that. Of course, he got sued by some of his co-investors, but he made enough money that he didn't really care. The 70s were a wild and crazy time. I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer and IT genius, Sid Tepps. I don't know if he ever bought a pet rock. And as a tribute to Gary Dahl, we're going to play this song from Simon and Garfunkel.
This, according to Artie, is my most neurotic song. I don't know whether that's true or not. It's a song about loneliness. It's called I'm a Rock. A winter's day in a deep and dark December, gazing from my window to the streets below, on a freshly fallen silent shroud of snow. I am a rock, I am an